Howdy of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Dexter Season 1, Episode 2. So this episode, I believe the title of it is Crocodile. Going into this episode, we have maybe some rebuttaling to do from the first pilot review. For any part of the first pilot episode, anything that eventually I think I said in that pilot review may seem like spoilers, but reasonably anything that I thought I was to say in the pilot review about how this show is to inevitably go. One, I naturally assume anybody would come on here because they're Dexter fans already, and they've probably seen everything, and they're just like, oh, new person doing Dexter things, great. Or, I naturally assume that people would assume that anything that I was to have mentioned for the pilot episode would have been an inevitable thing for it not to seem like a spoiler. But who knows? So, for any reason, I guess I'm just like trying to protect myself from a pilot episode if someone is to watch that and then to come here. But then some people don't do that. But anyways, so... because a lot of times it's usually the very first episode, and then everyone loses interest because I don't know why. It's always just like, hey, let's cling on to the first episode and then bump kiss whatever afterwards, but that's okay. So, going on to this episode, I also mentioned that some people could call Dexter's kills consistent through episodes. I would call them like the rough drafts, because it kind of feels like Dexter doesn't have it just seems like he's kind of like mowing over what he's to do through every one of these kills. Like there are times specifically where Dexter will drastically change the way he kills per season to season, because sometimes he'll get rusty, or because he may not have been a person that kills for a portion of time. Or he might get rushed, or there's some kind of storyline reason why Dexter is having to kill the way he kills in this show. But anyways, but eventually there'll be much more of a pattern of how exactly he goes about things. Or eventually he goes on to basically just kill people the way that they have been known to die. Or had been known to kill a guy or a woman or whichever. That's what I meant. So, but anyways, let's go on and let's talk about like the cliff notes of this episode. So the cliffy notes, just to kind of give a sense of that I saw this episode, because I actually did. So the main focus of this episode is to have Dexter in court. That I think is the most important part of this episode. And then also we have some side stories going on. Not only with like Dexter and Rita, like will they, won't they? Like, is the relationship going to start to diffuse because Rita is looking at Dexter just like, why don't you touch me like those French girls? Anyways, why don't you look at me like those French girls? Whatever line that's from. Anyways, why don't you draw me like those French girls? Anyways, so... Dokes is to have a seemingly more prominent story if this guy doesn't, like, stand out anyways in this show. Like, they give him an entire story that will lead to a story arcing thing. Like, believe me, because I do remember that part. Because... it was kind of funny when I started to watch this episode. Like, it got to the point where I'm like, okay, like, am I going to remember this episode or not? But then all of a sudden, I, like, went into it and I'm like, oh, yeah, like once we got to a spot, I'm like, oh, yeah, I remember this episode. Like, I remember a big chunk about it. There were some little bits and pieces that I didn't remember, but, like, I remembered a good chunk of it. And so, also, we are keying up that Deb is going to be a much more important character in the show than her just being in Vice. So, that's great. But yeah, so Also, Deb is going to have a boyfriend in this episode. Like, you're going to see that Deb isn't going to have very many boyfriends for very long, with the exclusion of maybe like one slight or two slight characters that eventually I will talk about when that comes up. So, other than that, like, we start to get like there's kind of like slivers of story for certain characters in this episode. Like Vince is bizarrely gone through, I think, a bulk of this episode. I don't remember seeing Vince at all throughout this episode. Like the creepy guy that everyone is going to grow to love because he's just weird. Anyways, but we have like a little sliver of like Batista backstory or Angel backstory in this episode where he just like kind of calls his wife, and I'm like, oh man, like I can't wait till we get more Batista backstory because I always enjoyed like Angel, because eventually once we get into more of his backstory and make him a more important character, eventually people will probably like Angel in these episodes. So yeah, other than that, I think that covers a bulk of this. We showcase a character called Carlos Guerrero, and he will be an important part, seemingly, in this story as well, because that will actually be tied to Dokes' story. So we'll consistently see Carlos consistently in these episodes. But with that said, let's go into spoilers about all this. Let's go into that coveted spoiler time, because I think it's that coveted time yet again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time I'm going to spoil this episode. So in the very beginning of this, we have Dexter, who is just floating in the water. He's just like floating in the water. All of a sudden, there's just some jet skis that come flying by, hopefully with Owen Wilson on them, because low-key variants. And and so Dexter is all of a sudden, because of these jet skis, all of a sudden he's going to get like splashed with water like coming at him. Dexter is to talk about like dreams, and like he's being very deep and stuff like that. And all of a sudden these people are to hit him with these like with the wave of water because of these jet skis. And so Dexter is to mention that he's like a monster, but today he's just a sea monster. And so Dexter gets out of the water and is to grab an apple and eat it. So that, I guess, leads to have had Dexter killed a person off camera, which leads him to go and put his blood sample in to the spot by the air conditioner. So that leads to Dexter eventually opening up his freezer to check out the Barbie doll again. And eventually he is to look at the one hand part, which is to have a number of different nail polished colors. And he's like, okay, like, don't quite understand what this is about, but eventually I'll probably figure this out later. So Deborah is to come into Dexter's place with bagels. With juicy, succulent bagels. So, both Deborah and Dexter are kind of like talking about like family and how like it like seems like it's been a long time since, like, besides just doing the case, that they've really just spent some time together and whatever. Ba 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 ba. Just a bunch of like dialogue that I was just like, nah. So, transitioning us to Dexter needing to go to court today. So Dexter is to go to court, and he is to do I guess, a statement or whatever, mentioning that he has heavily been doing a number of cases, 2003 cases to be exact, because the lawyer is just like, well, that's not an exact number, and Dex is like, no, it's an exact number. Like, I know exactly how many cases that I've involved in. Like, I want to show people how skilled I am, and like, so I'm gonna know to the dot how many cases that I've done. So Dexter is to go and do a statement in a court, and so Dexter is to eventually head out to check around the courtroom, eventually see some Sasquatch-looking guy, and so Dexter is to all of a sudden see a family, and a father of this family is to be like, okay, well, I'm gonna go in there, like I'm gonna go in there and embrace this whole like seeing this like proceeding of my son who had gotten killed, sadly, and I'm going to be the one standing up for our family. Like, it's kind of like the Batman Begins moment where Bruce Wayne goes into the court to, like, somebody needs to be there for, like, Bruce was there for his parents. This father is there for his technically spirit of a son. So this father goes in there, and so Dexter is to mention that, like, some people will, like, see things differently than he does. Dexter is to always see, like, stuff like this as an opportunity to just be like, well, hey, like, I'm gonna make it right. Like, if this court system can't, then I will. So, Dexter goes into this court case randomly, and so Dexter is sitting in on this, like, he's not gonna just be involved and just, like, jump in and just be like, I object! And the judge is like overruled. No. So Dexter goes in, and we are to find out a case about a man called Alexander Price who had been murdered by a running over of some car by supposedly a man named Matt Chambers. But here's the thing. So, like, eventually we'll find out, while we are to have consistently Dexter going throughout this court, that Matt is to try to, like, skirt away from trying to be involved in this murder, because I think he has done it a number of times. This guy is slippery, and eventually we'll find out that this guy's crocodile tears won't get him very far with Dexter. So, pushing on, so Dexter is to need to go to a case which is under a bridge somewhere. We are to see some guy dead there, because otherwise why would Dexter be there? Dexter goes on to just be like, this dead guy? I'm going to see what's up. So, this guy had fallen from, I guess, like, the, like, certain, like, vantage point, like, Dexter is saying, like, well, he couldn't have fell from over there, so he must have fell from the westbound causeway or whatever. And so LaGuardia is like, everybody, westbound causeway, like, or whatever that they said, westbound thingy-dingy, go ahead and check that out. So Dexter is just like, okay, there's something very unique in this guy's mouth. I'm going to go and open it up, and hopefully blood doesn't splatter all over my bate. And so Dexter goes and opens this guy's mouth, and blood starts flinging out, and Angel is like, medic! The paramedic is just like, oh no, this guy is just dead. This was just like a death rattle. This was just like, I needed to exert something from my mouth, and that just so happened to be blood hitting freaking Dexter, to where he goes into his room later to, like, go and, like, wipe himself down, but then eventually puts, like, a blue light over him to just kind of see if there's any blood residual things left. So, like, any blood fingerprints, technically, bizarrely. Anyways, so pushing on. So we find out that the thing that was in this guy's mouth was actually human flesh. So I'm assuming that this guy is a zombie, obviously, because this guy had his, like, head, like, crushed in. So obviously, like, we're going a zombie route for this detective show, right? No? Okay, great. Well, that sucked. Well, we could add a zombie episode, but I guess it is what it is. So, that pushes on to have Deborah come in to want to talk to Dex and mention it's like, hey, like I'm dating this guy named Sean, and Dex is mentioning like some other guy, and Deborah's like, no, like that guy's a slob, like no, like if anything, I met this one guy named Sean, and it seems like Deb and Sean's relationship is working out really well, surprisingly. So Dexter is like, well, hey, like if you really like this guy, how about you, Sean, Rita, me, like go on this double date, and so Deb is like, great, double date, that sounds cool. And then eventually, once we actually go on this double date, it seems that both Deb and Sean are very intimate, and it just seems like Dexter and Rita are just like two people there that are just like, yeah, like, should I, touch? Should we kiss? So, anyways, like, Dokes is to walk off, like, ticked off. And so all of a sudden, like, people are asking, hey, what's up his butt? And, like, Batista is just like, well, hey, like, because, like, I think Debs mentioned that he doesn't like lab rats or whatever, or he doesn't like the scientist people. And so Batista's like, well, hey, those scientist people make us look really good. And Dexter's like, like, Angel, you're weird, but you're cool also. Like, we also at some point get a call, I think, for Batista with his phone. Like, there's some stuff that I'm not going to cover because I don't want to go into heavily every single minute detail in this episode, but I probably will anyways. So, pushing on, the dead man who had fallen off the bridge because he wasn't a zombie was actually a man named Ricky Simmons, and he was a police officer. So that leads us to go, hey, it must have been the wife, right? So, so if anything, we push on to have Dokes desperately wanting to go and tell the wife, Karen, that her husband is dead. And LaGuardia and Dokes are going out, and you'll kind of see eventually that both LaGuardia and Dokes are going to consistently be partnered up together, because actually both Dokes and LaGuardia, were like partners for like the longest time, but then eventually LaGuardia did eventually get promoted. Eventually you'll get a lot of like LaGuardia and Dokes consistent backstory between them. But eventually, I think Deb and Dokes will eventually also get some time in together as well, but it is what it is. So, they'll get their time in the sun. So, anyways, Dokes and LaGuardia are going to notify, of course, Ricky's next of kin, which is his wife, and so they go in to notice that Carol is on the floor, dead. Viciously, horrifically dead. And so they're like, oh my god. So Dokes just like smashes the door in, like, Carol, I'm here. Or Karen, I'm here. So if anything, they're like, another murder in the house. So now they have to kind of figure out like what had happened to Karen, and so, like, that will happen eventually. But anyways, so what ends up happening is, I think, like, Matthews is to mention, like, what Ricky was working on. And that Ricky was working undercover with Carlos Guerrero. Da-da-da-da. So, if anything, while going on into this case, we find out that Dexter had found Karen's phone, and so, like, Batista had his hands on it, and so Dokes is like, hey, good work, Batista, and Batista's like, Dex found the phone, you schlub. Like, so we transition to have Dexter spending time with Cody, like trying to pull off a world's record. And so Dexter is to eventually like have Rita come in, give everyone cookies to basically tell like both of these kids to just go ahead and scram, because she's going to be spending some time with Dexter. And Aster is like, "Oh, so you're gonna kiss him?" And Rita's like, "Yes, maybe, kinda." So Rita and Aster are to go in another room so that way they can sleep. And so all of a sudden Rita is to just start like nibbling on Dexter's ear. And so Dexter is like, right now, like kids in other room. And Rita is just like, well, like they can sleep through thunderstorms and all kinds of things. Like if like if the world is to end, like they wouldn't know because they sleep so well. It's a joke that I'm making here. So Dexter is to all of a sudden start feeling Rita, and then all of a sudden Rita is to decide, like, wait a minute, like, I don't think I'm ready for this. And I'm like, okay, like we had this, like, start and stop with this relationship, and I think that's where it's going to start fizzling out. Plus, Dexter, like, has a lot of intimacy issues to where it's going to lead to him kind of hoping that when eventually they do have some sensual moments or some XES or SEX like moments, that eventually Dex will eventually like win Rita over, let's just say. But at the end of the day, I've seen this show. I've seen this show. Maybe it won't win her over. Maybe she'll just be like, God, like your is like nothing. Your dick is like nothing to me. Like you're just like you did nothing. That's what she'll say. So, anyways, your is nothing. You're not even trying. You schlub. So, anyways, so Rita is to like kind of push away, and then Dexter is just like, well, yeah, so we have a problem. We have an elephant in the room, and his name is SEX. I always have to spell things out garbagingly because sometimes YouTube in the ether of things will take a word and then just it'll be like profanity, and I'm like, whatever. Like, I should be able to say whatever I want. I don't know how many freaking videos other people will just get away with any number of things, but if I say some magically delicious word, profanity, whatever. Like, we need to, like, restrict this video for whatever reason, and it never made sense to me. But, okay. So, so Deborah is like, yeah, tell me about that elephant. Like, it seems easy to get around, but it just isn't. And so Dex is trying to comfort Rita and just be like, well, hey, like, it just needs to be right for the both of us. And, like, eventually that will happen. Because other episodes. So, Dexter is to go home and to try and sleep, but Deborah is to find the ice truck that Dexter had a head come flinging at him in previous episode. So, Dexter is to go on with Deb because she had found this ice truck, and Dex is like, yay! But not yay, because I don't want this guy to be found out so quickly. So, they go and they open this ice truck, and they are to find a big fat block of ice with 5 fingertips without a hand, like in this thing of ice, to showcase that there is a killer going to kill someone on the way. Because it'll happen. That eventually people should be looking out to probably go into some kind of spot of sorts that will tell us where the next kill is going to be found at. And I just realized that now. So, pushing on. So, what ends up happening is LaGuerta is with Matthews, and so Matthews is asking who was the one who found the ice truck, and LaGuerta is to say, well, Deborah did. And Matthews is like, yeah, like, of course it's her, because she's just like her old man, or even like her brother, or maybe like her mother, maybe like her distant uncle that was, like, whatever. Anyways, pushing on. So, but then LaGuerta is going to Deborah and just be like, yeah, so what, you did good, but if anything, like, you need to tell us what you're doing at all times, kind of thing. So that way, if you go missing because you do something stupid, then, like, that's on you. You're gonna be dead, and we're gonna have to find your carcass somewhere, kind of thing. So, oh wait, so we do have technically a Vince moment, but it's very quickly. Like, all we see is, like, Vince is just melting this thing of ice, and Deborah is just like, oh my god, we're watching ice melt. And, like, we have Vince who's, like, hitting on Deborah, but again, like, I want to see more Vince. Like, when you actually see him, like, eventually he'll, like, have a more prominent role somewhere in the distant, like, part of show, because eventually once he actually gets that, like, one thing with that one girl, like, then, like, they'll finally actually have him more prominent or whatever, but, like, he's just kind of, like, here and there, and then, like, he's, like, there to do, like, a dirty joke and then to go off most of the time. So, if anything, LaGuerta is to come in and watch this ice melt also, to mention it's like, well, I guess that harassment seminar that people went to, I guess, didn't really sink in, and so on and so forth. So, pushing on. So, Dokes was to find that Carol had left her husband one last message because she was hoping that Carol was hoping that she could call her husband to help her, but yeah, that didn't pan out. So they find out the person who had the skin. And it was a guy called Neberto Cervantes. I'm just going to call him Neberto through the rest of this episode. Hopefully you appreciate that. So, we find that Neberto is tied to Guerrero. And so we're like... And so that pushes to have Guerrero and Neberto going and doing dominoes with one another. They're just having a good time, reflecting on their past, just, like, slapping some cold beers with one another. And Dokes comes in and arrests Neberto. So that leads to Dexter going and continuing to go into the Chambers case, where Chambers is to, like I said before, mention that his car was stolen, and eventually these people find Chambers not guilty, because Chambers has a way of persuading people to, like, get him off this case, because we'll find out eventually that this guy has done this kind of case a number of times, and it all leads the exact same way. So, because Chambers had called to say that this car was stolen, and so I guess that gave him the easy out. So we transition to have Neberto being interrogated, and Neberto is just like, man, I'm all broken up about this guy who had died. Like, believe me, I feel so bad that he's dead. And so Dokes is questioning this guy, and Neberto is just like, well, hey, man, like, if anything, I heard that Ricky, like somebody was, like, sleeping around on his wife, and so maybe that's probably who actually killed this Ricky guy and not me. So Dokes ends up punching this guy out, and so LaGuerta is to go and rip off this arm bandage that Noberto was to have and match the skin with the skin that had gone missing from Noberto. Just like, yeah, you are freaking our guy. So, transition. So, Dex is to now go to Karen's home and try to play cat's cradle, I guess. And so both Angel and Dex are trying to figure out how exactly that this woman died, so they can kind of understand where exactly she all hid throughout this entire house. So eventually, this leads us to eventually try to figure out where this girl kind of ended up transitioning to certain spots, and then all of a sudden they are to see a floor tile that has blood on it, and so Dex is like, okay, she never got this far, and so they are to find that this must have been the killer's blood, and so now they're like, high five. They eventually find that Noberto was actually in both of these spots and had not only killed Ricky, but then had went back to go and kill his wife too, sadly enough. So Harry is there's flashback time. So Harry is to go and look at a mirror and recite this thing mentioning about his partner Davy Sanchez, where he is to mention that Davy Sanchez was his partner, Davy Sanchez was his hero, Davy Sanchez was a father, a son, whichever. And so Harry and Dexter are having this conversation about what Harry is gonna quite possibly do next. And Harry's like, well, we have to make it right. If anything, we'll grieve, but then eventually we'll go after the person who had taken my partner down, and that will ease the pain of this loss. So Dex is to go and find Chambers at this bar, because Chambers is just he's already gotten cleared of one murder, so he's gonna go and start another one. So Dex and Chambers are at this bar, and so Dexter is of course trying to get to know Chambers, and so Dexter is just hey, my ex-wife hates it when I drink, and this and that, and Chambers is like, oh yeah, F her, whatever. And so Chambers is to eventually watch a football game and see that Florida is playing, and Chambers is to hate the fact that Florida is winning right now. So Dexter's like, hey, you don't live around here? Hey, if anything, I don't like the Florida either. Good for you. So that leads Dexter to assume that Chambers has probably killed numerous people before, but probably not in this state. So that pushes us on to have Dexter kind of check via some lip DNA from off this guy's drink. Dexter is to go and look into the system if this Chambers guy has killed people before, and surefire enough, they go and they find that he had killed numerous people in other states besides Florida, because I guess they just checked to assume that this guy was a Florida bad guy, but he wasn't. So, and if anything, consistently we have Chambers who is to mention through here, there's nothing a new city can't cure. Anyways, so now Dex is to prep up the kill room, And then eventually, Dokes is to be spending time with Karen, and LaGuardia is just kind of getting a little weirded out by the time of which that Dokes is spending with Karen. He's kind of assessing or assuming some things that maybe somebody was right about something. So, uh, Dex goes on to do this double date, and I think I've technically covered that. So we transition to eventually having Naberto in prison, and Naberto ends up getting released by some guard to transition elsewhere. But where Naberto is to be transitioned to is to be hell, I'm assuming, because he ends up getting stabbed in the back numerous times. So see you later, because you're going to freaking be dead. So, bizarrely, Dexter is singing to both Aster and Cody. And so, wait, where are we going here? I am so confused. Let me pause here for a second. Okay. I accidentally was gonna hit the pause button. I accidentally hit the stop button. So yeah, so I'm gonna have to fuse recordings because I'm not gonna go over this again. Too much work to have to fuse stuff. I'm not I'll put the clips together and just mash it together. So I'm not gonna go through and do this all over again because I was like, wait, have I already mentioned some of this stuff? And I did. So some of this stuff might be a thing that I said earlier. So Dexter is to eventually sing to the kids, and eventually, Rita is to I think try to get intimate with Dex. Dexter and Deb are to talk about the fingertips, and that eventually, they're to talk about how this could lead to quite possibly finding the next killer and blah, 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 blah. So, Deb is to go on to talk to LaGuardia and Matthews. And so Matthews is going to promote Deborah to get out of Vice. And Deborah's like, oh, thank God. And so, she's hugging Matthews and getting the heck out of there. And so LaGuardia is just like, well, I hope you know what you're doing. And Matthews is like, well, I promoted you, so I think I know what I'm doing. So LaGuardia is to have a moment with Dokes and kind of press on him on why Dokes is spending so much time with Karen. And because LaGuardia is to tell Dokes that Karen had died. And so Dokes is to finally say that he did go and he had been sleeping around with Karen because Karen was going to tell Ricky that they were going to be broken up after he was to get off his case, but Ricky was taking too long to wrap up his case, so that way Karen could divorce and leave Ricky. So Dexter is to go and kill off Chambers, and so while he's waiting in his car, waiting to go and kill Chambers, Deb is to text him saying hey, I want to celebrate my promotion, because every time somebody is to get a pay bump or get a promotion or whatever, that's normally when they have to all have a party together and celebrate this whole promotion thing. So Deb instead waits, doesn't go after Chambers, and so Dex is to go and eat tacos with Deb. So what ends up happening is Deborah is to be so excited about her promotion, but she's also to be upset because she had found out that Sean actually had another woman with with him. And so Dex is like, well, who's the other woman? And Deborah was the other woman. And Sean was also married, and so on and so forth. So what ends up happening is that eventually Carlos is to be in the bathroom taking a dump, Carlos Guerrera, and Dexter is to follow him in there, just like bizarrely looking at him way too often, to where Carlos is just like, what are you freaking staring at? So Harry is to have another flashback with, Dexter is having another flashback with Harry, talking about Davy, and like just talking about how Harry tried to pin a murder on some guy and it just didn't stick, and so on and so forth. And so they like start to talk it out, how like Harry just wants to get this guy to like resolve this whole case. So, but we transition to like Carlos and Dexter being in the bathroom, and how Dexter is just really just so tempted to want to take down Carlos, but he doesn't. He transitions to instead take down Chambers into his kill room. Yeah, like that's the one thing that I forgot to mention. Like Dexter had like they always call like this spot like the kill room. So eventually, when I keep mentioning that name, because it will probably when eventually Dexter is to kill someone, they just bizarrely always called it the kill room. So, anyways, so Dexter is to be playing the video that was at the trial, and to have a lot of the newspaper clippings of what Chambers had done. And like this is almost kind of like severely close to the normal way that Dexter is to kill people. Like I think other times there are actually like photos and stuff of the person that this person had killed. There is this kind of like way about it where Dexter goes on to make these people feel bad about the things that they have done, or a lot of times they just sit there and just like Dexter like talks to them, because like this is like their end of their rope kind of conversation, like the last thing that they are going to say. And so Dex will like will listen to them, and so on and so forth. Because we have Chambers who blames the family for pushing him to this situation, and that the family had set him up. And Dexter is like, no, you did that on your own. Like, we have Chambers who is basically accusing any number of things beside his own self for how his life has gone the way it has. Like, Chambers is to also mention, like, hey man, like, when I get a lot of booze in me, like, I just can't control what I do. It's in, like, then stop drinking. Like, stop going to the bar. Like, what is it? Like, are you forced to go to the bar? Like, could you go and drink at your own home and not kill anybody? Like, are you just so tempted to just, like, kill somebody, like, while you're drunk? And being out somewhere? Like, is that just a thing for you? So, but anyways, so Dexter is just like, yeah, you're gonna use every excuse under the book besides, like, you just, like, needing to do this, you needing to, like, kill. Like, saying that the booze made you do it. Like, what are you gonna say next? The boogeyman made you do it? The devil made you do it? Come on, like, just say that it was, like, you just needed to do this, you needed to drink, you needed to kill, you needed to, like, have that kind of fruition, like, moment would have been great. So, pushing on, so Dexter is to go home because Chambers is dead, cutting his face, of course, as the usual way to get Dex to have this little bit of trophy, technically. So Dexter is to go home to eventually find the Barbie head is still on the freezer, but eventually when Dex is to go back into the freezer, the Barbie pieces are all gone. And so Dexter is to mention how, like, there are seemingly always going to be, like, once you're to try to figure something out, there's always going to be some missing pieces. And so, really, that's the way that this episode just ends. So, with that said, like, I am going to get the heck out of here. I'm going to have to fuse all this footage together. Like, these 2 whole clips. Wow, what an arduous process that's going to be. But anything, I'm going to get the heck out of here. Thank you for watching these reviews or anything that I do, because reasonably, some of them are really hard. And some of them are like, yeah, like, I've seen this numerous times over, and I'm just going back over it just because, like, I like this show, I like this thing, I like whatever, and hopefully, eventually, once we get through here, we'll find maybe more Dexter fans or whatever, because supposedly this show is getting a revival, or supposedly this show is doing any number of things. I don't know if it's going to be so easy to go and watch Dexter the early cuts, because I was going to go in there and watch Dexter the early cuts, and then all of a sudden I think like there was some like copyrighted problem that all of a sudden like there was places that I think like can't play the early cut things anymore. Like maybe there's some kind of disc copy somewhere, or maybe there's some kind of like box set of Dexter the early cuts that eventually I could watch. But with that said, I'm gonna get out of here. Bye everybody. Bye everybody.